So to start this one off, I was hoping just very briefly. I don't want to take up too much time with this, but just again to give people kind of a sense of the work you do. If you don't mind, maybe we could go down the line here, and each of you could talk a little bit about a recent crisis or emergency scenario that you dealt with, and how what the sort of main customer service that played out from your perspective was during that event. Robert, I don't know if you want to kick things off.
Sure. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey, and of course we had two fairly large earthquakes in Southern California back in July 4th and July 5th, the Ridgecrest earthquake sequence. And so I was part of that response. I'm particularly involved with the new earthquake early warning system called Shake Alert, which is being built for West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington. And so part of the response in working directly with customers in this particular case was with our partners who run the delivery side of Shake Alert. And so you may have heard in the news a little bit about the Shake Alert LA app, which did not deliver Shake Alerts to residents in LA County because, well, actually it didn't because it wasn't supposed to because of the way we set things up. Of course, another really big aspect of the USGS operation, which I'm not directly involved with, but is part of it, is providing earthquake information for everyone related to how big the earthquake was, where it was located, providing information for the variety of customers who might use for emergency response or those sorts of things. So a lot of different pieces to this whole puzzle, but that's just a little overview.
Sure.
Yeah.
Chief?
Sure, and I'll focus on fire, but CAL FIRE also responds in the event of earthquakes, so we all end up working together a lot of the time, pretty much any time we have emergencies occur. And for most recent and most devastating, I'll use the Camp Fire as an example. And what CAL FIRE provides to the state in general is rapid response to large and small fires, wildfires. We, on a daily basis and around the clock, around the year, around the calendar, we put out 95% plus of all fires at 10 acres or less in the state. So you often don't hear about what we're doing. 95% of the time, a fire doesn't get big enough to even make it on the news. And that's because our people are out there putting them out. So that 5% is where we kind of get into what we're going to talk about today related to CAL FIRE and related to the camp in particular that pretty much destroyed Paradise, Magalia, Concow, whole communities or large chunks of communities. There are fires that are going to happen in California that we are not going to be able to control. And that was a scenario that unfolded in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's what can happen. And unfortunately, we have those kind of areas that still exist and those kind of communities that still exist throughout California. And we are tuning, and we'll talk more about our process of tuning how we're going to deal with that in the future. And that fire really gave my organization the opportunity under Governor Newsom's orders to really look at vulnerable communities in a whole different way. And I'll get to that further. So that's my opening.
Thanks. Vance?
Most recently, my eldest daughter drank all the milk. My youngest daughter wanted cereal. That was a disaster in my household. It's all hazards, people. Professionally, it was the earthquake, earthquakes plural. You know, anytime you've got an earthquake and everybody said, hey, that's the perfect spot, right? Because there's not a lot out there. And while that's great, what you did have out there was a lot of people who were older. You had a lot of people with disabilities. You had a lot of people who were transportation disadvantaged. And so looking at how do we provide actionable information to all of those individuals, some of whom don't necessarily plug into traditional communication resources or outlets, was really important. right? How do we make sure that the people who are in their homes and have power but don't have water can keep their swamp coolers going, right? That it's 105 degrees outside and you've got older people that are stuck at home. How do we make sure they're all right? Then at the shelter, how do we make sure that it's not just physically accessible, but programmatically accessible as well, right? That there are wraparound services so that you can provide for acute medical needs at the shelter in an integrated environment for the entire community. So that's most recently what we'd focused on, and thankfully with great partnerships, it went really well.
Thanks. The next thing I wanted to talk about is, I mean, disasters have been happening forever. It's one of the, governments have been working with citizens in disaster scenarios for a long, I mean, it's one of their core functions, right? So what are some of the key things, though, that you guys have each seen in your respective fields, recent changes? I mean, so like in the last couple of years or so, what's changed? Like what's new in terms of how your respective agencies, work with the public when these types of incidents unfold? Robert, I don't know if you want to.
So interesting question. So the Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning System is the first of its kind in the United States, and I mean the other systems around the world. And I think it really puts the U.S. Geological Survey into a whole new context. Much of the information provided by USGS was post-event. This event happened. If you look on the timeline of information that's provided about an event, where does Shake Alert fit into that ecosystem of information? And it's in the first few seconds, or first several seconds of an event. And so now we're putting ourselves into a position where we detect an earthquake within a few seconds and make available a message that can be distributed by all of our partners. That in itself is a pretty tall order, because the basic currency of Shake Alert is time. Getting that information out fast. Getting that information out potentially will reach people and things with enough time for them to respond and take some sort of action, be it an automated action or a personal protective action of some sort, such as drop, cover, and hold on. That's very different for the USGS because it puts itself into a position where it's asking others to deliver the letter, to deliver the message by other people. So we're finding ourselves interacting with technical partners across many sectors, education, communication, et cetera. So that's a very, very important piece to consider. So we are connecting with these partners, both commercial and non-commercial, to help us deliver these things. That's a very important piece. Everything is automated because time is important. So the piece that's critical here is how do you get out messages fast enough? Actionable messages, something that shows up on someone's phone or something that goes to a device that takes action very quickly. Sending information over a cell phone, and I know Vance actually participated in a workshop, a focus group we did, is that how do you send some very effective actionable messaging? Do this now, drop cover, hold on, protect yourself now. Getting people to do things quickly. So the piece that I think that's very different, and it's new for the USGS, and this is a part that I'm particularly excited about, is that we're spending a lot of time. We have a small army of social scientists working with us from psychology, communication, education, a whole bunch of fields, to look at what does the evidence tell us about the best way to message and to set expectations. Because our key goal is in those first few seconds is to protect people, okay? And of course, also to facilitate effective recovery after the event is over. So it's really sending the USGS, I think, in directions that, and I can feel the anxiety from my colleagues of dealing with some of these issues, because traditionally we're doing science, we're reporting data, we're writing papers, we're providing information after events are over. Now we're involved in the whole mix. And I think that's where the big transition is coming in. And that transition hasn't fully happened. It's actually still happening. And every day I get kind of a weird phone call or email from someone who says, are we really doing the right thing? Are we doing this the right way? Another critical piece, and that's the last thing I'll say, is that it's a three-state system. So it's not just California. So we're working with agencies, emergency management agencies, state geological surveys, and universities across California, Oregon, and Washington. So this Joint Committee for Communication, Education, and Outreach, this JCCO group that was mentioned in my title, is actually that body of people who are that interface between the USGS and the rest of the 50 or so million people along the West Coast.
Interesting stuff. Chief, do you want to?
Yeah, now I feel like I've got decades to make decisions based on the seconds, and it's very true. I feel like to put in context kind of what CAL FIRE deals with and what the fire services in general deal with related to wildfire in particular. Things evolve at different rates. And we often have much more time. We also have a high frequency of these things happening, particularly this time of year, and we have the ability to saturate people's thought process on what's going on and turn into white noise. So much like LA not getting an alert based on it just wasn't intense enough at that location, we have the same thing with the 95% of those fires that you're hearing. We don't put out big messages for most fires. People see them, people understand that that's a fire. They'll turn on the news, sometimes it shows up, sometimes it doesn't. We may not have put out an alert of any sort. What we do is we spend time throughout the year identifying those conditions and times and things that people need to do to be prepared for when the bad one comes. So I have across the state, my people are looking at the weather every single day. They're looking at the weather for today, for tomorrow. They're looking at a 7-day product. They're looking at a seasonal product and making operational decisions on where we're moving resources throughout the state, where we're calling people back from their days off to staff up additional resources, where we're calling in our federal partners and other local government partners, and really kind of tuning our response capabilities to where the needs are most likely going to be based on seasonality, weather, and other conditions that are going on, maybe other activity. And so that we're doing all the time, every single day throughout the year, depending on what's going on, and kind of tuning that process. At the same time, we're messaging the public, instead of telling them all the little stuff that's going on, we're messaging the public, this is what you need to do to get ready, get set, and go. So Ready, Set, Go is our program that we use. readyforwildfire.org or the Ready for Wildfire app, which is under full renovation right now, and will be more and more interactive and reactive to the public's needs. But those are the ways that we're reaching out to the public. And by the way, those will have and currently have some alert and some basic where fires are happening throughout the state once they're of size that they matter, as I said. And then response. When we respond with the intent of putting every single fire out before it gets to 10 acres, as I said previously. The ones that don't, those are the ones that I message to the public. Those are the ones that get into the media quickly. And what we've found recently, more than we had, say, a decade ago, this is not going to be anything you haven't kind of lived through yourselves, people get information from every possible place except for us, and try to take action and ask questions about that. And so what I'm calling that's not information, that's intel. And for us, we separate everything. Intel is all the noise, including the noise we're creating ourselves, and information is that verified information. Going forward, looking to the future, we are working on ways to cut that space and time that it takes to verify and make intel information, and then get our information out through these other means that I was talking about. So in the near future, you're going to hear a lot about innovation. Amy Tong was up here in a panel earlier this morning. Department of Technology. We're working with the Department of Technology and General Services as well to develop methods and services that CAL FIRE and Cal OES will have access to that'll give us more information quicker so we can make those decisions and get information to the public more quickly.
A real quick follow-up there. So with that intel, I mean, so I'm guessing you're talking about stuff like, maybe somebody's tweeting that they're seeing a fire in a certain place or something like that. So do you actually have staff at CAL FIRE that's constantly monitoring social media and things like that to try to see when stuff like that is cropping up and decide if it's important information or not? Like, how do you go about that?
That's a great question, and we do it in a couple of different ways. So yes, we do that, but we're not trying to debunk any of that. So that noise is going to be there. The public's going to see that. We're going to see that. And we will, if there's something that's an anomaly that's really kind of a strange thing, we will try and verify it quickly. But remember, everybody else is running away from these things, and we're going to them. So we're inserting people who are communicating back what's going on to the fire's edge. We know where that thing is.
Right.
And so that's how we're verifying the information. And even some of the aerial imagery and different things that you can access, for instance, MODIS, that's just satellite imagery that shows heat signatures. It pops up late in a cycle, and it's very gross. It doesn't have fidelity that is really that the individual landowner, homeowner can even make any decisions based on. But it's there. So how do we craft that into a better way? So we're not so much trying to push that information or kind of correct it as much as we're trying to get the right information and be the source for the right information.
Sure. Vance, do you want to talk a little bit about changes you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for us in the last several years in particular, it's been culture. I mean, that's been a big change. And it's been a very deliberate process. So by way of background or context, think about integration from this perspective. During Hurricane Katrina, 70% of everybody who perished had an access or functional need. Right, 70%. So what does that say about the way that historically, as a nation, as emergency managers, at every level, we have traditionally planned for, prepared, responded, or recovered with that perspective in mind? We typically, as individuals, come at things from our own experience. And that's what guides us. And if your experience has nothing to do with ramps or accessibility, then sometimes good people who are trying to do good things simply don't know what they don't know. And as a result, what we found is that people in those communities were to a large extent marginalized, not just from the process, but that they were disproportionately impacted anytime there was an event. And it turned out that it wasn't just during large-scale disasters, right? We still continue to see that during every disaster, regardless of scope or scale or location, the type of disaster, the one commonality is that people with disabilities, older adults, persons with access or functional needs, will be disproportionately affected. And so trying to get ahead of this, California created the Office of Access and Functional Needs. And the governor essentially said, I want you to identify what are the needs that people have before, during, and after disasters, and then integrate them throughout our emergency management system at every level, through every facet. And so whether it's working with CBOs, whether it's working with government partners, whether it's with our friends at the private sector, we preach, teach, and evangelize this message. One of the things that we've done is taken an approach that in all of our plans, the blueprints we put forward, will have this framework within them. So an example would be our state emergency plan. Right, we put out a state emergency plan, and essentially, it's a blueprint that every county should follow when they're creating their own emergency plans. And there used to be like a 1 or 2 page section about access or functional needs. Then it was in the middle of the plan. Well, the way these things tend to work is, if you're in logistics, you go to that section of the plan. If you're in response, that's where you go. Comms, that's where you go. Which means nobody ever got to the access and functional needs part. And so in the rewrite, we took that section out. And instead, we integrated it throughout every single section of the plan. Not so that it monopolized the document, but so that anybody in any facet of the response, recovery, planning, or logistics, would understand the way that access and functional needs intersected within their roles and their responsibilities. And so now what we find is that things like interpreters at press conferences, or accessible transportation when you're evacuating populations, or wraparound services at a shelter, are no longer thought of as extra or special. It's just simply what we do, right? We simply take care of all Californians, regardless of their needs or their backgrounds. We just make sure that all Californians can be accounted for. And it's pretty great because by being more inclusive, what we find is that the messages go further, the response is expedited, and fewer people die. There's a decrease in human suffering. And that's a personal benefit to each of us. And I think speaks well about who we are, not just as individuals, but who we are as a state. That we've set up this model, this framework, that there's been a cultural shift that has now resonated with our federal partners and in other states across the country. And in fact, now we have other countries, Japan, Chile, Australia, and others, who specifically come to California to learn about what we've done with access and functional needs, because they want to see the same cultural shift take place in their own nations. So it's been a big win for us.
That's really interesting. Robert, I want to talk a little bit more about the shake alert system, because I think what you were describing earlier with the recent quakes. I mean, I think it provides a really interesting case study with using customer feedback to improve upon or make changes to a system that's out there. So I realize that, well, I'll let you sort of describe it, but I guess like one of the end results with some of the recent feedback around the shake alert system was lowering the level for which, when alerts were sent out with Los Angeles' app. So do you want to describe a little bit kind of what happened there and why that change was made?
Sure. So the Shake Alert LA app is actually can be downloaded by anyone, and used. It has information about earthquakes and preparedness information, recovery information, but only people within Los Angeles County would be able to receive a message, a shake alert, through their phones, that push notification, much like you see on your phones from Twitter and those sorts of things. And so that's one basic piece that's critical, is it's only being tested in the County of Los Angeles. And so the way it's set up, and we've been working across the state and federal landscape to think about this basic trade-off. Would you rather receive an alert just to have situational knowledge that something is happening, or you might feel some very minor shaking? Or would you rather receive an alert for potentially damaging shaking? The choice that we made, because we're still in testing mode, and that's a piece that I think that's sometimes missed with the Los Angeles City of LA app, is that we opted for the potentially damaging shaking piece. So the way the app operated, or rather the way the whole system operated during the course of this event, is that there was a minimum earthquake magnitude that was met for both the 6.4 and the 7.1. but the estimated shaking in LA County was below that minimal damaging shaking. Now, of course, the response was completely opposite. And I happen to manage our social media, our Twitter account, and boy, there were a lot of colorful responses on that thing. And it turns out that also Shake Alert LA accidentally put their feedback pathway through the USGS. So I have a friend in Golden, Colorado who has received hundreds of emails that were subsequently forwarded to me with this feedback. That was a lot of fun as well. And of course, my phone number is also on the webpage, and you can imagine what happened with that. So of course, overwhelmingly, the response for this event is that people said the app didn't work. So we worked with the City of LA, and again, this is a partnership that has worked out really well for us, that their interest is to reduce the threshold for shaking so that you would get an alert if you would just feel some minor shaking. Now, that's where we're at with them. This is what we're doing. And in fact, I just saw the announcement today that the app has been modified so that now people will get this felt shaking alert. Now, there's a trade-off here. When there's a big earthquake, or when there's an earthquake, there are more earthquakes. Earthquakes cause other earthquakes. And so how would you feel personally, and this was actually a comment that I made for the LA Times, is that how would you feel having to drop cover and hold on? Because the goal here is time, right? That time is important. That every time you get an alert, you should take that protective action. Are you willing to do that 20 or 30 times a day? Because that 31st time or that 21st time is when the shaking will be high enough to potentially hurt you. And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. So, and this is something that we bounce back and forth with the City of LA. And currently, public opinion, our customers would like to know, first of all, if that an earthquake has happened, they want to get an alert about it, they want to know what's going on. And yes, we want them to take the protective action, but realizing the fact that this may tip that balance in the direction of doing many, 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 many responses to that event. Now, of course, we may need to change it back, but this is where it stands currently. So that was a favorable response, and this is what we're doing, and we're trying it out as an experiment to see what happens. And it's going to be interesting to see the results.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Chief Porter, with the couple minutes we have left here, I wonder if you could talk a little bit. The last decade or so, I mean, it's been this era of more severe wildfires, and there are also, I would assume this is the case in California, though I don't know. Maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But you also have more people living in what you'd call like the urban wildland interface, so closer to places that burn. How have those two trends changed the way that you interact, or you interact with the public? I mean, is that forced you to make any changes to your operations?
Well, and it's a great question. I mean, just communicating with that public that's in rural areas when communications start to go down and things is a challenge. And so that's one thing that you can kind of overlay in my response here. But it's true. There are 40 million people in California, and the growth in California over the last 30 years has been exponential. So we've had fires in the past that burned in the same footprint that they're burning now that didn't burn up any homes, let alone whole neighborhoods or whole towns. Paradise is different. Paradise has been there for over 100 years, and the fire started in the wrong place on the wrong day. And so, but the flip side of that, and a nod to events and all that has gone on, we've been working together at the SOC, the Operations Center at OES, for the last 4 years on different fires that have occurred. And what's happening now is incredibly positive. And the reason I'm kind of bringing this back to that population, by and large, those populations that are out in these communities in the foothills, the gold country, they're becoming more and more elderly. Mm-hmm. And then there are access and functional needs, but there are also young families. And there are young families with preschool age kids. There are families that have no or one car, and the one car goes off to work while the rest of the family stays at home. And so the ability for people to move quickly out of areas is not necessarily at their fingertips when these things happen. And so all of these things, and then you lay over climate change and what's happening across the whole of the globe and in California, and the fuels that have grown over the last 100+ years that are still out there and ready to burn where they haven't burned up in the last decade or so. All of these things are kind of coming together. And so the approach that we're taking is to look at the needs of the people. That's first and foremost, but how do you deal with that? And being forestry and fire protection, I look at the entire landscape. I work with the Forest Service. We work with a all-of-the-above approach to protecting each one of those communities and people that are living out in those in the more rural areas, and then in the kind of suburban areas. But all of the above means we have to do fuels management and forest health work out there. We need to do defensible space and community defense in here. We need to do defensible space around the structure. We need to consider how we encourage landowners and homeowners to do structure hardening in order to reduce the possibility of a home igniting. And then we need to have all of those plans to get people out of the way and make sure that we don't leave anybody behind. So all of that is part of our planning process.
Right. Okay. Well, this has been a great conversation, and there's definitely a lot more we could talk about here, but we're unfortunately out of time. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time, and yeah.
Thank you.